The first call came at 3:17 in the morning. It lasted 12 seconds. The second call came at 3:19. It lasted 7. Both calls were placed to emergency dispatch from the same number. Both ended before a full sentence was completed, and both were logged as abandoned. By sunrise, the caller was dead. Her name was Meera Sanyal, 29 years old, corporate legal consultant, no known enemies, no prior police reports, no history of domestic disturbance. She lived alone in a 10th-floor apartment overlooking the eastern riverfront, glass balcony, minimalist interiors, security gate downstairs. At 3:17, the dispatcher heard breathing. At 3:19, she heard a whisper, "Police." Then, the line cut. If you think 7 seconds isn't enough time to say something meaningful, consider this: the human brain can process terror in less than one. Detective Rachel Monroe stood inside the apartment at 9:42 that morning, sunlight slicing through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a living room too clean for violence. There was no overturned furniture, no shattered glass, no visible forced entry. Just Meera Sanyal lying on the polished marble floor beside her couch. Single gunshot wound to the chest. Close range. No weapon recovered. Rachel didn't kneel immediately. She stood still, hands resting on her hips, denim jacket slightly creased, boots leaving faint moisture prints from the hallway. Her gaze moved slowly: coffee table, balcony door, kitchen island, hallway leading to bedroom. Order liberate. The body told one story. The room told another. No struggle indicators. No defensive wounds visible at first glance. And yet she had called twice, which meant she knew something was wrong before the trigger was pulled. That detail mattered, because victims who anticipate death behave differently than victims caught by surprise. Rachel finally crouched beside the body. Time of death estimated between 3:15 and 3:25, which meant Meera made those calls while still alive, and likely while the shooter was present. There were no neighbors reporting gunshots. No security guard hearing anything, which suggested one of two possibilities: either the weapon was suppressed, or the building's concrete swallowed the sound. Rachel's eyes shifted toward the balcony. 10 floors up. Unlikely entry point, but not impossible. She turned toward the hallway. "Get me dispatch logs. I want the raw audio." An officer nodded. The early morning sun made everything look deceptively calm, but calm spaces often hold the most violent secrets. Meera's phone lay 2 feet from her right hand. Screen cracked. Call history open. Rachel didn't touch it. She examined positioning. The phone had been dropped, not placed, which suggested urgency or interruption. There were no fingerprints on the kitchen counter besides the victim's. No visible shoe prints other than her own and responding officers. And the front door showed no sign of forced entry. That meant one of 3 things. She knew the person who came in. The door had been left unlocked, or the shooter had access credentials. The building required keycard entry at the lobby and elevator. Security footage would matter. Rachel stood and moved toward the bedroom. Bed untouched. Closet closed. Laptop on desk. Open. Screen active. Frozen on a document draft titled, "Compliance Disclosure Internal." That word lingered. Internal. Corporate. Legal. Meera Sanyal was a compliance attorney, which meant she handled secrets, the kind companies prefer buried. Rachel didn't jump to conclusions, but motive often hides in paperwork before it appears in blood. By 10:30, preliminary sweep concluded no forced entry, no theft, no immediate signs of sexual assault, single shot, precise placement, professional distance. But the calls contradicted a professional hit. Professionals don't let targets dial emergency twice, unless something disrupted the timeline, unless the killer hesitated, or unless Meera saw them before they intended to reveal themselves. Rachel stepped onto the balcony. The river below shimmered in the late morning light. Across the water stood a row of commercial towers. One of them belonged to Virex Industries, Meera's primary client. Coincidence is a luxury detectives don't afford themselves. Rachel returned inside. She replayed the mental timeline: 3:17, first call, 3:19, second call, gunshot within minutes, which meant the killer was inside during those 2 calls, and allowed her to attempt contact, unless the killer was entering at that exact time, unless she saw someone approaching through the hole, unless the threat wasn't a stranger. Dispatch audio arrived at 11:12. Rachel listened through headphones. First call, heavy breathing, a rustle, what sounded like fabric movement, then silence. Second call, breathing again, quieter, a whisper, please, don't. Click. The don't was soft, not shouted, which suggested proximity. The shooter was close enough that she didn't dare raise her voice, which meant she wasn't alone during that second call, which meant the shooter either didn't notice or didn't care. Rachel removed the headphones. Get me building entry logs between 2:30 and 4 a.m. If the killer used a keycard, there would be a record, unless it was cloned, or stolen, or disabled. By noon, the building manager confirmed, no unauthorized entries recorded, no alarms triggered, no malfunction reported, which narrowed it down. The killer either belonged in the building, or already had access, residents, staff, security, or someone Meera herself allowed in. Rachel requested Meera's recent communications. Last outgoing text at 2:58. Are you outside? Sent to contact saved as A. No reply. Rachel stared at that single letter. A short names are often intimate, or intentionally vague. She looked back at the body. The absence of chaos disturbed her more than visible destruction would have, because chaos is emotional, but precision is intentional, and intentional violence requires purpose. By mid-afternoon, forensics confirmed no gunpowder residue on Meera's hands, which meant she didn't fire the weapon. Trajectory analysis placed shooter approximately 3 to 4 feet away. Direct, centered, heart line, the kind of shot that ends arguments. Unless the argument wasn't loud. Unless it was quiet, controlled, measured. Rachel stepped back into the living room and imagined the scene, Meera near the couch. Phone in hand. Someone facing her. Conversation tense, but not screaming. She dials once, breathing. Line drops. She tries again, whispers. Then, impact. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. Victims who call for help rarely get to finish what they want to say. That unfinished sentence becomes evidence. If you're listening carefully, you can sometimes hear more than fear in those seconds. You can hear recognition. Rachel requested audio enhancement. If Meera recognized the shooter, her tone might reveal familiarity. Because fear sounds different when it's caused by a stranger versus someone you trusted. By evening, one detail stood out. In the background of the second call, just before disconnection, there was a faint metallic click. Not the gunshot. Earlier than that. Subtle. Rhythmic. Like something being placed on a surface. Or a mechanical adjustment. Rachel replayed it 6 times. It wasn't random noise. It was deliberate movement. The kind that precedes finality. She looked again at the laptop. Compliance disclosure, internal. Unfinished draft. Autosave timestamp. 2:50, 4 a.m., 3 minutes before the text message. Which meant Meera was working late. Possibly finishing something important. Possibly something dangerous. Rachel leaned back against the kitchen counter. If Meera was about to expose corporate misconduct, that created motive. But corporate hits don't typically allow emergency calls. Unless the killer wasn't corporate. Unless it was personal. Unless both overlapped. Outside, the sky dimmed. Inside, the apartment remained eerily pristine. No broken trust visible. But trust had been broken here. Somewhere between 3:17 and 3:19. And someone walked out of that apartment calm enough to close the door behind them. Rachel turned to the lead tech. Pull phone records for contact A. Because whoever stood on the other side of that second call was either the last person Meera hoped would save her, or the last person she realized had come to end her. If you believe justice begins with noise, you haven't studied silence. And this apartment was full of it. Contact A had a full name. Arjun Malhotra, age 32, senior financial analyst at Virex Industries. Same company Meera represented in compliance audits. Phone records confirmed the text at 2:50, 8 a.m. Son, are you outside? No reply. But Arjun's phone pinged off a cell tower less than 800 meters from Meera's apartment at 3:10 a.m. Close enough to walk. Close enough to watch. Close enough to lie. Rachel didn't arrest him. Not yet. Location pings prove presence in a general area. They do not prove entry. Security logs showed no keycard entry under Arjun's name during the relevant window. But residents could let guests in. and Meera lived alone. Unless someone had stayed over. The building's external cameras revealed a black sedan circling the block at 3:05. It passed twice. Headlights dimmed the third time. Parked briefly out of direct camera angle. License plate enhancement took time. But Rachel wasn't interested in the car yet. She was interested in motive. Meera's laptop was transported to digital forensics. Preliminary review revealed that the compliance disclosure draft involved internal accounting irregularities, specifically concealed liabilities and inflated quarterly projections. If exposed, it could trigger regulatory investigation and possibly criminal charges. The draft included reference to executive authorization chain. Rachel recognized the implication immediately. Not clerical fraud. Top-level knowledge. That kind of exposure creates panic. Panic leads to damage control. Damage control sometimes leads to elimination. But professional eliminations are clean, efficient. No calls to emergency dispatch. No emotional hesitation. Unless the killer wasn't hired. Unless someone panicked. Unless someone confronted her hoping to persuade her. And conversation turned lethal. Rachel requested Arjun Malhotra's financial records. Large debts. 2 personal loans. 1 gambling account flagged for excessive activity over the past 6 months. Pressure makes people unstable, especially when employment depends on silence. By early evening, Arjun arrived voluntarily. Pressed shirt. Controlled posture. Cooperative tone. He admitted to being near the apartment building. Said he received Meera's text but saw it late. Claimed he drove by because she had sounded distressed. Earlier that night, Rachel asked him to clarify. He stated they had argued over the phone around 2:30 a.m. Argument topic: disclosure. He claimed Meera was overreacting. He said releasing the document would destroy people who weren't responsible. Rachel asked if he meant executives. He avoided eye contact. Said he meant employees. He denied entering the building. Denied seeing her. Denied owning a firearm. His hands remained steady. Too steady. People who are lying often overcorrect physical tremors. Rachel asked why Meera would text, "Are you outside?" If he wasn't expected, he hesitated. Less than a second. But enough. She thought I might come over. Did you? No. Cell tower data contradicted that distance. But proximity isn't entry. Rachel shifted tactics. Did you know she called emergency services? His pupils contracted. Micro-expression. Surprise. Or fear. I didn't know. If true, that meant he didn't anticipate the timeline becoming public. If false, it meant he hadn't prepared for that question. Rachel observed his breathing. Still measured, but his right thumb pressed repeatedly against his index finger, an unconscious stress signal. She asked about firearms. He denied ownership. Background check revealed no registered weapons. But illegal access isn't uncommon. Rachel ended the interview without confrontation, because confrontation too early fractures stories in unpredictable directions. Outside the interrogation room, she reviewed enhanced audio. Forensics had isolated background frequencies from the second call. There was breathing, Meera's, and behind it, a faint sound consistent with a metallic object being placed on a glass surface. Like a firearm being set down momentarily. Why set down a firearm? Unless the shooter wanted to speak first. Unless the weapon wasn't immediately drawn. Unless the confrontation escalated. Rachel reconstructed Arjun arrives. Argument continues. Meera insists on disclosure. He attempts persuasion. She texts, "Are you outside?" because he is not yet at the door. Or because she hears something. Or because she doubts his denial. The timeline still wavered. Security footage from the lobby between 2:45 and 3:20 revealed something subtle. At 3:13, elevator doors opened on the 10th floor. No visible person exiting. Camera angle partially obstructed by structural beam, meaning someone could have stepped out undetected. Rachel replayed frame by frame. There, a flicker, shadow movement. Not enough to identify, but enough to confirm presence. Elevator logs indicated keycard access used by resident ID 10-4B, Meera's unit, which meant her card, or a duplicate. Rachel requested building staff interviews. Cleaning crew arrived at 6 a.m. Found nothing unusual in hallway. Security guard on duty reported no disturbances, but admitted he stepped outside for a cigarette around 3:15. 4 minutes. Unobserved lobby. 4 minutes is sufficient for entry or exit. Rachel requested guards' phone records. 3:14 a.m. Incoming call lasting 30 seconds. Unknown number. Distraction, coincidence, or coordination. The black sedan's plate enhancement returned partial digits matching a rental agency vehicle. Rented earlier that evening under corporate account linked to Virex Industries. Not Arjun personally, corporate. That widened the circle. Rachel leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes briefly. 2 calls. 7 seconds of whisper, metallic placement sound. Corporate rental vehicle. Keycard used from victim's unit. Security guard distracted. This was not a spontaneous crime. It was layered. But layered crimes sometimes include one unpredictable variable. Emotion. If this was corporate damage control, it was clumsy. If this was personal desperation, it was structured. Rachel requested fingerprint dusting results from the balcony railing. 1 partial print not belonging to victim. Unidentified. Which reopened the possibility of secondary presence. 2 people inside. 1 persuading, 1 executing, or 1 observing. The apartment across the hall was vacant. No witnesses there, but the unit below reported hearing a dull thud around 3:20. Not a gunshot. A thud. Suppressed weapon. Which meant preparation. Which meant planning. Rachel stared at Arjun's file again. Financial desperation. Professional vulnerability. Emotional connection to victim. But the rental vehicle traced back higher. Executive chain. Meera's draft had named 3 senior officers. One of them Chief Financial Officer Devraj Kapoor. 48 years old. Long tenure. Reputation immaculate. Rachel had seen immaculate reputations before. They tend to crack loudly. She ordered subpoenas for executive communications between midnight and 4 a.m. If corporate leadership anticipated exposure, there would be digital panic, messages, calls, deleted logs. By midnight, one anomaly surfaced. At 2:46 a.m., Devraj Kapoor placed a 3-minute call to Arjun Malhotra. At 2:51, Arjun called Meera. At 2:58, Meera texted Arjun. At 3:17, she dialed emergency. The sequence tightened. Rachel wrote it down. 2:46, executive to analyst. 2:51, analyst to victim. 2:58, victim texts analyst. 3:17, emergency call 1. 3:19, emergency call 2. 3:20-ish, gunshot, which meant whatever was discussed at 2:46 set the chain in motion. Rachel stood and walked to the evidence board. Pinned photos, timeline lines crossing, corporate hierarchy above, victim below, Arjun in between. Intermediaries often break first, but executives rarely soil their own hands, unless cornered. Rachel didn't believe in coincidences aligning this neatly. The metallic click in the audio replayed in her mind. The faintness suggested it wasn't close to the phone, which meant the phone wasn't on speaker, meaning Meera was hiding the call, possibly behind furniture, possibly behind the couch. Rachel revisited crime scene photos. There, subtle indentation in couch cushion near armrest, as if someone had leaned forward abruptly, and on the glass coffee table, a faint circular smudge, roughly the diameter of a suppressor, if placed briefly, then lifted. Why place it down? Unless to show it. Threat first, action second. Rachel exhaled slowly. This wasn't a professional execution from start to finish. This was escalation. A confrontation intended to intimidate. That ended in fatal choice, which meant someone underestimated Meera's resolve, and someone else panicked. The next move would determine everything. Rachel ordered ballistic comparison with recent registered suppressor purchases in the region, and she requested Devraj Kapoor come in voluntarily, because executives often agree to interviews when they believe compliance optics matter more than fear. If Devraj walked in confident, he either believed his insulation was secure, or he believed Arjun would absorb the impact. But somewhere between 3:17 and 3:19, someone realized persuasion had failed and decided silence required something permanent. The question was not whether this was corporate corruption. The question was who pulled the trigger, and who believed they wouldn't have to. Devraj Kapoor did not hesitate. He arrived at headquarters the next morning at 10 sharp. Tailored stride. Calm eyes that scanned the precinct lobby as if he were evaluating real estate rather than walking into a homicide inquiry. He requested coffee. Rachel declined the gesture of hospitality. Politeness is often a negotiation tool. She wasn't negotiating. Devraj confirmed the 2:40, 6 a.m. call to Arjun Malhotra. He described it as damage containment discussion. Rachel asked what required containment at nearly 3 in the morning. He responded without visible irritation. A misunderstanding about draft disclosures. He admitted Meera had been preparing a compliance document that could destabilize investor confidence. He claimed she misunderstood context. Rachel asked whether that misunderstanding justified a late night call chain. He paused. Corporate executives rarely pause unless recalibrating. It justified urgency. He denied instructing anyone to visit Meera. Denied knowledge of her death until contacted by police. Denied owning or accessing a firearm. His tone never spiked, which meant either he was truthful or he was practiced. Rachel placed the rental vehicle photo on the table. Black sedan. Corporate account. He recognized it. Said Virex often rented vehicles for executive transport. He claimed no knowledge of its movement overnight. Rachel asked for fleet assignment logs. He agreed. Too easily. People who agree easily sometimes rely on documentation control. Rachel shifted the focus. Did you believe Meera would go public? His answer came quickly. She wouldn't. Confidence. Not hope. Confidence. Why? Because she understood consequences. Rachel leaned slightly forward. Consequences for whom? Silence. Not long, but measurable. For the company. Not for her, not for employees. For the company. Language reveals priority. Rachel ended the interview after 50 minutes. Devraj left composed. Arjun, meanwhile, was deteriorating. His second interview began with visible fatigue. Dark circles under eyes. Jaw tension increased. Rachel didn't accuse. She asked him to replay the 2:50, 1 a.m. call with Meera. He admitted she was upset. Said she accused him of being complicit. Complicit. Not merely aware. Complicit. Rachel asked whether he went to her apartment after that call. He hesitated longer this time. Yes, admission. He said he went to talk. To calm her down. He insisted he did not bring a weapon. He claimed the door was unlocked, which contradicted building keycard logs. Unless she opened it. Rachel asked if anyone else was present. He said no. He said the argument escalated. He said she threatened exposure. He said he told her to wait. Rachel asked if he heard her make any calls. He said no, which meant either he was lying or he left before 3:17. Rachel asked when he left. He said approximately 3:10. Cell tower placed him nearby until 3:28, which meant he remained in the vicinity. He claimed he walked around to clear his head. Rachel didn't challenge the timeline yet. Instead, she asked a simple question. Did you ever see a firearm in that apartment? His breathing changed, subtle. He blinked twice.
No.
Too quick. Rachel placed the enhanced audio waveform image in front of him. Highlighted the metallic click. We found this on the emergency call. He stared. Blank expression. Then, I don't know what that is. Rachel studied his hands. Slight tremor now. Not controlled. The pressure was cracking. But cracks don't equal confession. She ended the session. Because fear needs time to ferment. Back at the lab, ballistics returned preliminary findings. 9mm round. Subsonic ammunition. Consistent with suppressor use. Clean entry. Minimal powder dispersion. Which confirmed proximity. The partial fingerprint from balcony railing came back inconclusive. But chemical residue testing on the glass coffee table revealed trace oil consistent with firearm lubricant. Fresh, within 12 hours of discovery, meaning the weapon had indeed rested there briefly. Rachel reconstructed again. Arjun arrives. Argument intensifies. Weapon displayed. Possibly not his. Possibly already in apartment. Possibly brought as leverage. She calls emergency once while he's distracted. Call drops. He notices. Confrontation spikes. She attempts second call discreetly. He hears whisper, moves, places weapon on table briefly, metallic click, picks up, fires. But something didn't align. If Arjun fired in panic, why suppressed weapon? Suppressors require planning and access and intention. Unless the suppressor belonged to someone else. Unless someone provided it. Rachel requested a warrant for Arjun's residence. Search revealed no firearm, no suppressor. But in his trash bin, a torn paper fragment. Part of a printed email. Subject line partially visible. Directive. Ensure silence. The sender line cut off. But the timestamp 2:38 a.m. minutes before Devraj's call. Rachel reconstructed digital logs from Virex servers. At 2:36 a.m., Devraj accessed Meera's compliance draft remotely. At 2:42, an encrypted internal message was sent from his account to Arjun. Deleted at 2:47. Recovered partially. Text fragment. Handle it before market open. Ambiguous. But ominous? Handle what? Conversation? Disclosure. Or the person. Rachel leaned against the evidence board. Executives rarely write explicit instructions. They imply. They rely on subordinates to interpret urgency. Interpretation is where crimes are born. If Devraj implied suppression, Arjun may have interpreted that as physical suppression. Or someone else did. Rachel revisited the security guard's 3:14 a.m. call. Number traced to a prepaid device purchased 2 days earlier. Activated within city limits. Deactivated at 4 a.m. The call duration 30 seconds. Just long enough to say, step outside. Which meant someone ensured the lobby camera would not capture exit. Which meant someone planned escape. Arjun did not have access to that level of coordination. Executives do. Or hired intermediaries do. Rachel examined Arjun's vehicle. Gunshot residue test negative, but on the passenger seat. A faint fiber consistent with high-end suit material. Not conclusive, but interesting. She requested fiber comparison with Devraj's wardrobe if consent given. He declined voluntary submission, which meant warrant necessary. Meanwhile, Meera's phone underwent deep recovery. Deleted voice memo discovered. Timestamp 2:53 a.m. audio playback revealed Meera speaking to herself. Or recording evidence. I'm not backing down. If something happens, it's because. The recording cut abruptly. Possibly interrupted by call. Or by knock at door. Rachel felt the weight of that unfinished sentence. Victims often anticipate threat before violence materializes. Meera sensed escalation, which meant the confrontation may have been premeditated. Rachel's team mapped movement data. Arjun's phone traveled from Virex Tower to Meera's neighborhood between 2:55 and 3:10. Devraj's phone remained stationary at his residence. But stationary phones do not guarantee stationary people. Executives know how to separate devices from actions. Rachel ordered traffic camera pulls between Devraj's home and riverfront. Black sedan matched route at 2:59, which meant corporate rental vehicle left executive district, which meant someone connected to him used it. Driver identity unclear. Rachel reviewed Devraj's home security footage request. His legal team delayed compliance. Delay is strategy. Time erodes detail. But not enough. Rachel called Arjun in again. This time, she placed the deleted email fragment in front of him. Handle it before market open. He stared. Sweat formed at hairline. I thought he meant convince her. Did he say convince?
No.
What did he say? He said this couldn't reach regulators. Those exact words. Yes. And what did you understand that to mean? Silence stretched. 20 seconds. 30. His breathing accelerated. I went there to talk. Did you bring a gun? Nope. Did someone else? His eyes flickered upward, not toward Rachel, toward the ceiling. Searching memory, or constructing. There was someone in the hallway. That was new. Describe. I saw a man near the elevator when I arrived, before or after you entered. When I left. After. Why didn't you mention this? I didn't think it mattered. It mattered. Describe him. Tile. Dark jacket. Hat. Generic. Convenient. But possible. If Devraj sent someone to ensure outcome, Arjun might have been intermediary distraction, or witness, or scapegoat. Rachel replayed the timeline once more. 2:46 call, 2:50 call, 2:58 text, 3:17 call, 3:19 call, 3:20 gunshot, 3:14 guard distraction, 3:28 Arjun leaves area. Black sedan route matching executive district. Metallic placement sound. Suppressed round. This was no longer just a confrontation. This was layered control. If Arjun went to persuade, someone else may have gone to guarantee, which meant Meera faced not one threat, but two. And somewhere between those two, the final decision was made. Rachel stared at the city skyline through her office window. Corporate glass towers reflected sunlight. Immaculate surfaces hiding internal fractures. If Devraj orchestrated this, He would never pull the trigger himself. But someone did. And that someone stood within 3 to 4 feet of Meera Sanyal at 3:19 in the morning. While she whispered, "Please, don't." The next step required pressure. Not on the analyst. On the executive, because influence leaves fingerprints, even when gunshots do not. Pressure does not always create noise. Sometimes it creates distance. Within 24 hours of Rachel requesting fiber comparison and expanded traffic footage, Devraj Kapoor's legal counsel filed a formal objection to what they described as reputational overreach, which meant he was worried. Powerful men do not mobilize legal shields unless they feel proximity tightening. Rachel shifted tactics. Instead of pushing directly at Devraj, she widened the frame. Corporate crimes often unravel through peripheral weaknesses. Assistants, drivers, security contractors. The rental sedan traced back to a Virex executive mobility account managed by an external logistics firm. The booking time 2:31 a.m. authorized digitally through Devraj as credentials. Pickup location automated lot near executive district. Driver assignment field blank, which meant self-operated retrieval. Traffic camera confirmation showed a male exiting the lot at 2:38. Face partially obscured by cap. Build consistent with Devraj's height, but not conclusive. Rachel didn't need conclusive yet. She needed pattern. Meanwhile, forensic timeline refinement narrowed the estimated time of death to between 3:18 and 3:22. That placed the gunshot almost precisely after the second emergency call, which meant Meera was alive when the shooter realized she had reached out. And the reaction was immediate. Rachel requested acoustic reconstruction of the suppressed discharge. Based on apartment dimensions and ballistic trajectory, analysts concluded the shooter stood near the coffee table, slightly angled toward the balcony, which placed the victim between couch and table, which aligned with indentation patterns. But there was something else. Gunshot residue mapping on the marble floor revealed faint particulate drift extending toward the hallway. Not strong enough to suggest a second discharge, but consistent with brief airflow change, like a door opening quickly, or someone moving rapidly. Rachel revisited Arjun's claim. He said he left around 3:10, but the residue pattern suggested movement after the shot, which meant someone exited swiftly. If Arjun left before the shot, he would not account for that airflow disturbance, unless he lied. Rachel brought him in again. This time, she removed accusation entirely. She spoke calmly. "Walk me through the last 2 minutes you were inside." He swallowed. Said they argued. Said she moved toward the couch. Said he felt overwhelmed. Said he told her he needed air. Rachel asked if he saw a weapon. He paused longer than before. "Yes." "Whose?" "I don't know." "Where was it?" "On the table." "Place displayed." "By whom?" "He claimed he didn't bring one. He claimed he didn't know how it got there." Rachel asked if anyone else entered during argument. He said no. Then he corrected himself. "I heard something in the hallway." "What?" "Footsteps." "Before or after you saw the gun?" "After." Inconsistencies were multiplying. Rachel placed the enhanced audio again. Listen carefully. The metallic click. Then, faintly, barely perceptible, what analysts now isolated as a second breathing pattern. Not Meera's, lower frequency, controlled. Rachel watched Arjun's face as he listened. Color drained. He leaned back. "There were 2 of us. Not confession. Correction." "You and who?" "I don't know his name." That was the first crack with substance. Rachel stayed silent. Silence invites elaboration. "He came in after me." "How?" "I don't know." "Did Meera know him?" "I don't think so." "Why do you think that?" She looked confused. That mattered. Confusion implies unexpected presence, which means Arjun may not have been the primary threat. Who placed the gun on the table? He did. Description? Tall. Dark jacket. Gloves? Gloves loved lamed lack of prints. Did Devraj send him? Arjun's breathing spiked. He said someone would make sure it didn't escalate. Exact phrasing. Something like that. Which meant Devraj may not have trusted Arjun to contain the situation. So he layered insurance. Insurance arrived armed. Rachel reconstructed the new sequence. Arjun arrives first. Argument. Devraj's hired intermediary arrives shortly after. Gun displayed to intimidate. Meera calls emergency once while attention divided. Intermediary notices. Second call attempted. Intermediary reacts. Places weapon momentarily on table while moving closer. Picks up. Fires. Arjun freezes. Shooter exits swiftly. Guard distracted. Corporate rental vehicle departs. Arjun remains briefly. Stunned. Leaves later. If true, Arjun became witness to escalation he did not intend. But witnesses who stay silent become accomplices. Rachel asked why he didn't report this. I thought they'd blame me. They still might. He looked down. Because being present during murder is proximity to guilt. Rachel needed corroboration. She requested phone geolocation triangulation for any secondary device within Meera's apartment radius during the critical window. One unidentified device pinged briefly between 3:16 and 3:21. Burner phone. Activated earlier that night. Deactivated immediately after. Signal triangulation placed it inside the building, near 10th floor. Which aligned. Rachel subpoenaed rental agency surveillance from the automated lot. Image enhancement improved facial clarity marginally. Jawline and gait analysis suggested high probability match to Devraj Kapoor. Not absolute, but compelling. Rachel prepared warrant for his residence and digital devices. Legal resistance intensified. Public relations firm issued statement expressing deep sorrow over Meera's death and full cooperation with investigation. Cooperation often means calculated compliance. Search warrant executed at dawn. Inside Devraj's home office, investigators located a locked drawer. Inside ammunition case, 9mm subsonic rounds. Brand-matched ballistic residue from scene. No firearm recovered, but ammunition possession established familiarity. Rachel examined his closet. One dark jacket missing from matching set. Dry cleaning receipt dated previous afternoon. Garment description charcoal overcoat. Rachel requested dry cleaner surveillance. Video showed Devraj retrieving coat at 6 p.m., which meant he had access to attire matching Arjun's description. Meanwhile, fiber analysis from Arjun's vehicle passenger seat returned partial match to high-grade wool blend consistent with Devraj's suit manufacturer. Still circumstantial, but converging. Rachel brought Devraj in under warrant. He maintained composure initially. Denied ever entering Meera's building. Denied authorizing violence. Rachel presented rental lot footage. His jaw tightened. Presented ammunition box. He said it was for personal range practice. Presented burner phone triangulation. He claimed ignorance. Then Rachel placed one final piece. Recovered deleted internal message from Devraj to an unidentified contact. Timestamp 2:39 a.m. second. Ensure compliance. Language again ambiguous. But followed by no noise. Silence in interrogation room thickened. Rachel leaned forward slightly. Did you go there? No. Did you send someone? Silence. Did you anticipate she might call for help? He looked at her directly. For the first time, irritation surfaced. She was going to ruin everything. Not denial. Admission of motive. Ruin what? Stability. There it was. Corporate stability valued above human life. Rachel didn't accuse of pulling trigger. She didn't need to. Conspiracy requires agreement, and digital evidence showed orchestration. But she still lacked the shooter. The intermediary. The man in dark jacket. Arjun described him vaguely. Burner phone suggested operational awareness. Rachel traced prepaid phone purchase to a convenience store near industrial docks. Security footage captured buyer wearing cap and mask. Cash transaction. But height consistent with Devraj, which meant he may have orchestrated personally. Or stage procurement. Rachel returned to Meera's apartment once more. Stood in the quiet living room. Imagined 3 people occupying this space. One determined. One desperate. One calculated. The metallic click replayed in her mind. That sound carried more weight than the gunshot. Because it represented decision. The moment intimidation shifted to execution. Rachel knew something else. People who hire violence often underestimate unpredictability. Arjun was cracking. And if pressured correctly, he would testify, because fear of prison outweighs loyalty to executives. Rachel authorized conditional cooperation discussion. Offer reduced charges for full disclosure. Arjun agreed to wear recording device in controlled conversation with Devraj's legal intermediary. High risk, but necessary, because direct confessions rarely occur in interrogation rooms. They occur in places where power feels secure. And Devraj still believed his insulation was intact. He underestimated one thing. Meera Sanyal had called twice, and those 14 seconds of fear had become the thread pulling apart an empire. The next conversation would determine whether that thread snapped or strangled the man who tried to silence her. Arjun agreed at 1640 hours. By 1900, the wire was in place. He sat inside an unmarked Sedan 2 blocks from Virex headquarters, hands resting on his knees, staring at nothing. Fear does not always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like resignation. Rachel stood outside the vehicle, arms folded, posture steady. She did not offer reassurance. Cooperation deals are not comfort agreements. They are survival exchanges. The plan was simple. Arjun would request a meeting with Devraj's legal intermediary, officially to align narratives, unofficially to provoke confirmation. Locationally, a private conference room inside a members-only business club overlooking the river. Neutral ground, controlled acoustics, high ceilings, heavy drapes, sound dampening but not blocking, recording equipment calibrated. Rachel listened from a surveillance van parked across the street. At 1923, Devraj entered the club. He did not arrive alone. He brought the intermediary, Rohit Sen, external counsel, and one private security associate who remained downstairs. Devraj looked composed. He always did. At 1931, Arjun was escorted upstairs. The door closed. Silence for 3 seconds. Then chairs moving. Rohit spoke first. "We need clarity." Arjun's breathing was audible through the wire. "I didn't plan for it to go that far." A pause. Devraj's voice came measured. "Go that far." Careful phrasing. Arjun swallowed audibly. She wasn't backing down. Another pause. Rachel watched waveform levels spike slightly. Devraj responded quietly. "You were instructed to calm her, not silence her. Calm her." Language distance again. Arjun's voice trembled. "He brought a gun." Rachel leaned forward in the van. Devraj's voice lowered. "You said you could handle it." "I thought I could." "Then why did it escalate?" "Because escalation implies failure, and failure implies miscalculation." Arjun's breathing quickened. She called someone. Devraj did not immediately respond. That silence was longer. 7 seconds. Rachel counted. Finally, "I told you no noise." There it was again. No noise. Arjun whispered. She tried to call for help. Devraj's reply came colder now. And he shot her." The room's air shifted audibly. Chairs creaked. Rohit interjected quickly. "We are not discussing hypotheticals." Damage control mode. But Devraj did not deny presence of a third party. He did not ask, "Who?" He did not express surprise. He moved directly to containment. "That conversation never leaves this room." Rachel signaled to recording text to mark timestamp. Arjun pressed further as instructed. "You said someone would make sure it didn't spiral." Devraj's tone hardened. "And it didn't." Which meant outcome aligned with expectation. Not intention, expectation. Arjun's voice cracked. "She's dead." A beat. Markets opened stable. There was no raised voice, no visible rage, just calculation. Rachel felt something tighten in her chest, not emotion, but recognition. This was not impulsive violence. This was weighted prioritization, human life measured against stock fluctuation. Arjun whispered, "You told him to go." Devraj replied evenly, "I told him to prevent exposure." Prevent exposure. The language had shifted from calm to prevent, from contain to prevent. Escalation mirrored in phrasing. Rachel had enough for conspiracy, but she still needed the shooter identified. Arjun asked carefully, "What about him?" Devraj responded, "He's handled." A handled. Meaning paid, or removed, or both. Meeting ended at 1952. Arjun exited first, visibly shaken. Devraj remained inside 2 additional minutes with Rohit. Audio captured Rohit stating quietly, "You should not have gone personally." Rachel's pulse steadied. "Gone personally?" Devraj responded, "Was unreliable." Meaning Arjun, which implied Devraj had indeed been present, directly or indirectly. The final line before audio ended, "No one will connect it." That sentence was delivered without doubt. Rachel authorized immediate arrest warrants. Devraj Kapoor was taken into custody at 20:10 hours in the club parking garage. He did not resist. He did not appear surprised. Executives understand when insulation burns away. Simultaneously, search teams executed secondary warrants tied to Rohit Sen's communications. Encrypted contact logs revealed payments to a private contractor operating under consultancy cover. Name Vikram Dutt. Former military contractor, security specialist, unlicensed firearm history suspected but never proven. Burner phone purchase linked via facial recognition probability to Vikram. Cell triangulation cross, referenced placed his device inside Meera's building between 3:16 and 3:21. Rachel reviewed Vikram's file. Disciplined. Efficient. No online presence. Paid through layered shell accounts connected indirectly to Virex discretionary fund. Arjun had not pulled the trigger. He had been present. He had participated in coercion. But Vikram Dutt had executed. And Devraj Kapoor had orchestrated. The arrest team located Vikram at an industrial storage facility near the docks. He attempted flight. Short pursuit. Apprehended at 23:48. Inside the storage unit, investigators recovered a 9mm handgun fitted with threaded barrel. Suppressor found separately in tool case. Ballistics match confirmed within hours. Rachel stood in interrogation observation room as Vikram sat across from two detectives. He did not deny being in the building. He did not deny firing the weapon. His justification was mechanical. She was escalating. Escalating how? She was dialing. Dialing. As if calling emergency services was aggression. Rachel stepped into the room personally. She studied him. No rage. No guilt. Just procedural execution mindset. Who instructed you? He remained silent. Professional loyalty. Rachel placed Devraj's recorded words on the table. Played the segment. I told him to prevent exposure. Vikram's eyes shifted slightly. Minimal reaction. But reaction. Did he tell you to bring a suppressor? Silence. Did he tell you there could be calls? Silence. Then finally, he said no noise, which meant instruction was clear. Suppressor ensured compliance with that directive. Rachel nodded once. He had confessed operational intent. Devraj had confessed orchestration. Arjun had confirmed presence and facilitation. The structure was complete. But Rachel returned once more to the moment between 3:17 and 3:19. Because justice is not only about proving conspiracy, it is about understanding timing. Why allow the first call? Why allow the second attempt? Vikram explained under sustained questioning. She was fast. Not faster than a trained contractor, which meant he hesitated. Why? Arjun was talking. Conversation distracted him, which meant Arjun's role was not trivial. His presence created window. And that window became 14 seconds. 14 seconds that transformed a clean execution into prosecutable conspiracy. Rachel left interrogation room knowing something else. Corporate crimes often rely on the assumption that panic will silence witnesses. But Arjun panicked in the wrong direction. He survived, and survival sometimes outweighs loyalty. By midnight, formal charges were filed. Devraj Kapoor, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction, solicitation. Vikram Dutt, first-degree murder. Arjun Malhotra, accessory in conspiracy pending cooperation agreement. Press statements drafted. Market reaction immediate. Virex shares plummeted at opening bell the following morning. Stability, it turned out, was more fragile than Devraj calculated. Rachel stood at her office window as dawn broke. Riverfront shimmered under pale light. Meera Sanyal had believed exposure mattered more than consequence. She had been right. But she had underestimated desperation. And Devraj had underestimated 14 seconds. Those 14 seconds of breathing and whisper became the fracture point. If she had not dialed, the narrative might have remained corporate suicide. Unexplained intrusion. Untraceable. But she dialed. Twice. And in those seconds, fear became evidence. Evidence became leverage. Leverage became collapse. Rachel returned to her desk and reviewed the audio one last time. Please. Don't. That unfinished word had carried across marble floors, through suppressed acoustics, through corporate insulation, and it had reached the one place Devraj could not control. The truth. There would be trial. There would be testimony. There would be strategy and legal maneuvering. But the architecture of the crime had already cracked. Because silence, when forced, often echoes louder than sound, and Devraj Kapoor had built his plan around the absence of noise. He forgot one thing. Whispers are still heard. Arrests make headlines. Trials make history. But history is rarely shaped inside courtrooms alone. By the time the sun rose over the river on the third day after the arrests, Virex Industries had entered crisis containment mode. Trading halted briefly at opening bell. Board members issued statements distancing themselves from Devraj Kapoor. Internal emails, once sterile and polished, turned frantic. Rachel did not watch the markets. She watched the secondary fractures. Because conspiracy cases are not secured by dramatic recordings alone. They are secured by consistency under pressure. Arjun Malhotra's cooperation agreement required full disclosure. No minimization, no omissions, no strategic amnesia. He sat across from federal prosecutors, voice hoarse, recounting the sequence again. 2:46 call from Devraj. Language about ensuring compliance. The tune urgent. Then the second instruction. Someone will assist. He admitted he did not question that phrase. He admitted he assumed it meant negotiation reinforcement. He admitted he did not anticipate lethal force. But he also admitted he saw the suppressor, and stayed. Rachel listened from observation room. Arjun described the moment the gun was placed on the coffee table. He said Vikram rested it there deliberately. A visual message, not yet aimed, just displayed. Meera's eyes fixed on it. Her breathing changed. Arjun said she stepped slightly back toward the couch. That was when she made the first emergency call. He did not notice at first. Vikram did. He moved faster, disconnected it. Argument intensified. She insisted she would report everything in the morning. Arjun said he told her to reconsider. That word, reconsider. Vikram told her there would be no morning. Then came the second call attempt. Whispered, Vikram heard the pleas. And that was when the calculation shifted from intimidation to elimination. Rachel studied Arjun's expression as he recounted the gunshot. His eyes unfocused slightly. Trauma memory. Or guilt. Perhaps both. The prosecutors asked the question Rachel had already answered privately. Why didn't you stop him? Arjun replied quietly, because I thought he was bluffing. People often misjudge the finality of violence until it occurs. That misjudgment cost Meera her life. Meanwhile, Devraj's defense strategy began forming. He claimed language misinterpretation. He claimed prevent exposure, referred strictly to legal injunction. He claimed no noise, meant no media leak. He denied authorizing lethal action. He framed Vikram as rogue escalation. But the financial trail contradicted that narrative. Payment of a large discretionary bonus transferred through shell accounts to Vikram's consultancy 2 days before the murder. Label, Special Risk Mitigation. Rachel testified before a grand jury regarding digital evidence chain. Every timestamp mattered. Every phrasing nuance mattered. Corporate defendants survive on ambiguity. The prosecution aimed to strip it away. Vikram Dutt, for his part, remained composed. He did not attempt full denial. He attempted justification. He claimed operational assumption that exposure equaled catastrophic damage. He framed it as strategic containment. When asked directly whether Devraj knew lethal force would be used, he paused, and then said he knew what no noise meant. That sentence would carry weight. But Rachel knew juries respond not only to language, they respond to human sequence. So she reconstructed for the prosecution team the emotional architecture of the crime. The display of the weapon. The first call interruption. The escalation triggered by second whisper. The immediate shot. The airflow disturbance from swift exit. The guard distraction call. The rental vehicle route. Each detail formed continuity. No chaos. Only layered control. During evidence review, forensic audio analysts refined the emergency call further. Under advanced filtering, just before the metallic click, a faint voice was audible. Not Meera. A male voice low. Single word.
Enough.
The timing aligned seconds before the shot. Rachel played the filtered clip multiple times. There was no mistaking it. That word was not panic. It was decision. The prosecution prepared to introduce it as enhancement evidence. Defense objected, claiming distortion artifact. But technical certification supported authenticity. Rachel understood something else now. Devraj's greatest miscalculation was not operational. It was psychological. He believed controlled men would remain controlled. But controlled men under arrest recalibrate loyalty. Arjun cooperated to reduce liability. Vikram cooperated to reduce sentence severity. Both revealed converging interpretation of Devraj's intent. Board members began distancing further. Internal audit uncovered broader accounting manipulation extending beyond Meera's draft, which meant motive deepened. Exposure would not merely harm stock price. It would expose systemic fraud. Rachel returned one final time to Meera's apartment after forensic release. Empty now. Furniture removed. Echoes louder. She stood near where the coffee table once sat. Measured distance. 3 to 4 feet. Imagined the final alignment. She thought about 14 seconds. In homicide investigations, minutes often blur, but seconds define outcome. If Vikram had fired immediately, there would have been no emergency log, no audio, no digital thread to pull. But intimidation introduced unpredictability, and unpredictability created evidence. Rachel did not romanticize that fact. It did not redeem the loss, but it dismantled the architecture that sought to hide it. Court proceedings began 3 months later. Devraj entered not guilty plea. Vikram pled guilty to first-degree murder under negotiated cooperation. Arjun pled to reduced conspiracy charge. The emergency call audio was played in court. Jurors sat silent. 14 seconds. Breathing. Whisper. Metallic placement. Nof. Suppressed discharge. The sound was muted, but its impact was not. Financial experts testified to motive scale. Digital forensics experts testified to message recovery. Rachel testified to timeline cohesion. Defense attempted to frame Devraj's language as corporate shorthand. Prosecution reframed it as coded instruction. In cross-examination, Devraj maintained he never explicitly ordered murder. Rachel watched him closely. He never denied foreseeing possibility. He relied on technical absence of explicit phrasing. But conspiracy law does not require explicit verbs. It requires agreement and foreseeability. And foreseeability was embedded in preparation. Suppressor procurement. Burner phone. Guard distraction. Rental vehicle routing. Layered contingencies reveal expectation of escalation. Rachel's final testimony line before stepping down was simple. He planned for silence. It was not dramatic. It was factual. And juries often respond to precision. Deliberation lasted 4 days. Verdict: guilty on conspiracy and solicitation counts. Sentence: life imprisonment without parole eligibility for decades. Vikram received life. Arjun received substantial but reduced term under cooperation. Virex Industries dissolved under federal oversight within a year. Executives indicted in parallel financial fraud case. Rachel did not attend sentencing. She returned to her office instead. Cases end in paperwork more often than applause. But this one carried a quiet weight. Because Meera had tried. She had not remained silent. She had dialed twice. And in doing so, she altered trajectory. Rachel opened the archived audio file once more, not for evidence review, but for confirmation. The whisper. The pause. The breath. That was the moment courage met violence. And though violence ended her life, courage destabilized the system that killed her. Rachel closed the file. Outside her window, the river moved steadily. Markets fluctuate. Executives rise and fall. But decisions made in seconds ripple outward for years. 14 seconds had dismantled a corporate empire. 14 seconds had rewritten power equations. 14 seconds had proven something simple. Silence is never absolute. Even whispers leave evidence. 6 months after sentencing, the case refused to stay closed. Not legally. Legally, it was finished. But patterns rarely exist in isolation. Rachel was reviewing unrelated financial seizure documents when a flagged name resurfaced in a separate inquiry. Special risk mitigation. The same phrasing used in the Shell transfer to Vikram Dutt. But this time, it appeared in a different corporation's expense ledger. Different industry. Different city. Same terminology. Coincidence is rarely symmetrical. Rachel requested cross-agency access to the flagged investigation. Preliminary details indicated a whistleblower at a logistics firm had died in what was ruled a suicide 3 years earlier. No emergency calls. No obvious struggle. But the internal audit language mirrored Virex phrasing. Containment. Stability. No noise. Rachel felt something shift. Devraj Kapoor may have believed he invented nothing. He may have simply adopted a pre-existing playbook. Corporate containment sometimes evolves into doctrine. Doctrine becomes culture. Culture becomes quiet compliance. Rachel met with federal investigators overseeing the logistics case. They confirmed suspicious financial transfers labeled under discretionary risk categories. But unlike Meera, the whistleblower in that case had not dialed. No audio. No 14 seconds. Which meant less leverage. Rachel requested archive communications from Devraj's tenure before joining Virex. He had previously held advisory position at a consulting firm specializing in corporate crisis navigation. Consulting firm named Meridian Advisory Group. Rachel examined Meridian's client list. 3 corporations over 10 years had experienced sudden whistleblower deaths, followed by internal stabilization. None prosecuted. All ruled accidental or self-inflicted. Rachel did not claim conspiracy yet, but she recognized pattern density. She requested sealed grand jury transcripts from Devraj's financial fraud proceedings. Within those transcripts, a minor detail surfaced. An internal code phrase circulated among senior leadership: stability above disruption. That phrase mirrored Meridian's consulting doctrine published in archive promotional materials. Rachel dug deeper. Meridian's founder, Anil Verma, retired, residing overseas, but his operational framework persisted. Internal documents described escalation ladders: Level 1, persuasion; Level 2, legal injunction; Level 3, reputational containment; Level 4, permanent stabilization. Permanent stabilization. Language sanitized beyond recognition. Rachel closed the file slowly. Virex may not have been origin. It may have been iteration. Rachel assembled comparative timeline charts. In 2 prior corporate incidents, there had been evidence of private security contractors retained shortly before whistleblower deaths. Both cases lacked direct audio evidence. Both lacked witnesses willing to testify, which meant they collapsed under evidentiary insufficiency. Meera's case differed because of interruption. Arjun's panic. The emergency call. 14 seconds. Rachel requested interview access to Vikram Dutt again. Prison environment shifts loyalty dynamics. Vikram initially refused, but when presented with potential exposure of larger network, his interest changed. He denied systemic network, but he acknowledged referral chain. Meridian had provided consulting connections. When containment required reinforcement, private contractors were recommended discreetly. He described it not as murder for hire, but as risk insulation. Rachel asked how many times he had been retained under that framework. He did not provide number, but he did not deny repetition, which was answer enough. Rachel returned to her office with new understanding. Devraj had not improvised. He had inherited language and structure from Meridian. Corporate executives rarely design violence from scratch. They inherit sanitized frameworks that remove moral friction. Rachel considered reopening older cases, but legal limitations complicate retroactive prosecution without new evidence. Still, patterns matter. She compiled comparative report, not for immediate indictment, for structural recognition, because prevention sometimes emerges from exposure of doctrine. Meanwhile, media coverage of Devraj's conviction sparked shareholder activism in multiple firms. Risk management policies began undergoing scrutiny. Consulting firms faced inquiries regarding language use in containment protocols. Permanent stabilization became media headline. Rachel watched interviews where corporate spokespeople denied any interpretation beyond legal resolution. But language once exposed cannot fully retreat. Rachel visited Meera's parents quietly, not as publicity gesture, as closure acknowledgement. They asked only one question: did she suffer? Rachel answered truthfully. It was fast. They nodded. Grief does not require details. It requires assurance that effort mattered. Rachel left with something heavier than satisfaction. Justice in one case does not erase architecture enabling others. Back at headquarters, she reviewed Meridian's historical advisory memos. One paragraph stood out: in high volatility scenarios, decisive action prevents systemic collapse. Decisive action. Ambiguity again. Rachel understood now. The battle is rarely against individuals alone. It is against euphemism, against language engineered to detach consequence from action. Devraj believed he operated within coded corporate realism. He believed liability could be layered and insulated. He underestimated one variable: unscripted human reaction. Arjun's fear. Meera's call. Vikram's audible word. Enough. Those elements were not in the playbook, and that deviation dismantled structure. Rachel submitted formal memorandum recommending regulatory review of corporate risk consulting language nationwide. Some colleagues viewed it as beyond scope, but Rachel understood scope expands when patterns align. Cases end, frameworks persist. Weeks later, federal regulators announced inquiry into advisory firm risk protocols. Meridian's archived documents became public record. Executives across sectors quietly revised language. Permanent stabilization disappeared from manuals. Sometimes deterrence does not require mass arrests. Sometimes it requires exposure. Rachel returned to the riverfront one evening after work. She stood outside Meera's former building. Lights on different floors now. New residents. Ordinary life resumed. But architecture remembered. Concrete absorbs sound. It does not erase it. Rachel thought about something Vikram had said during final interrogation. She was escalating. That phrasing had revealed mindset. Calling for help equated to escalation, which meant in their doctrine, defense was aggression. Rachel watched the river flow under city lights. Investigations are rarely linear. They ripple. They reveal layers beyond the initial crime. Meera Sanyal had intended to expose financial fraud. Instead, she exposed operational violence embedded inside corporate language. That was not in her draft. But it became her legacy. Rachel turned away from the building and walked toward her car. Cases like this do not close cleanly. They echo. They reappear in different forms. But every exposed framework weakens the next attempt. Devraj planned for silence. He received exposure. Meridian engineered doctrine. It received scrutiny. Vikram executed without noise. His word, "nuff," became recorded evidence. 14 seconds once dismantled a corporation. Now they were reshaping compliance culture across sectors. Rachel did not mistake that for victory. It was adjustment, balance correction. Justice is rarely complete. But sometimes it is contagious, and silence, once broken, becomes harder to restore. 1 year after the conviction, the emergency audio was used in a training seminar, not for public release, not for media, for investigators. The 14 seconds became instructional material, a case study in hesitation, in escalation, in how intimidation shifts to execution. Rachel sat in the back of the lecture room while younger detectives listened. The instructor replayed the enhanced clip. Breathing. Whisper. Metallic click. Enough. Muted discharge. The room remained still. Then the instructor paused the audio and asked, "What changed between the first call and the shot?" Hands went up. Distraction. Delay. Decision. Rachel listened without speaking. Because the correct answer was layered, what changed was control. Until the first call, the perpetrators believed they controlled the environment. After the first call, control fractured. The second call confirmed loss of dominance, and violence was used to restore it. That dynamic repeats across many crimes. Loss of perceived control often triggers irreversible escalation. Rachel left the seminar before it ended. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She answered. A female voice, steady but tense. "I need to report something." Rachel asked for location. The caller worked in compliance at a manufacturing conglomerate. She had discovered irregularities. Internal pressure escalating. Language used by leadership mirrored phrases Rachel recognized. Containment, stability, prevent disruption. The caller said something else. "They told me to reconsider my tone." That word again. Reconsider. Rachel instructed her to document everything. To avoid isolation. To ensure third-party legal contact. Prevention often begins before escalation reaches point of no return. The caller hesitated. "Do you think they'd go that far?" Rachel answered carefully. Escalation depends on perception of threat. It was not reassurance. It was realism. Rachel coordinated with federal oversight teams discreetly. Corporate actors adapt. After Virex exposure, overt coordination decreased. But structural reflex remains. Weeks passed. No violence occurred. Regulatory intervention initiated early audit. The whistleblower remained alive. Intervention timing mattered. Rachel reflected on that difference. In Meera's case, the chain moved faster than oversight. Here, awareness moved first, which meant containment could not mutate into coercion. The absence of violence does not create headlines, but it prevents autopsies. Meanwhile, Devraj Kapoor's appeal process began. Defense strategy shifted toward challenging admissibility of audio enhancement. They argued that the word, "nuff," could not be definitively attributed to Vikram. Rachel reviewed forensic certification again. Confidence remained high. Appellate courts focus on procedural precision, not emotional narrative. Rachel testified once more regarding chain of custody. Every detail intact. The appeal was denied. Sentence upheld. Inside prison, Devraj reportedly maintained that his mistake was trusting subordinates. He never publicly acknowledged intent. Executives rarely do. They frame consequence as mismanagement, not morality. Vikram Dutt remained silent after sentencing. No interviews, no statements. But in one recorded prison counseling session, he reportedly said something noteworthy. I followed instruction. Instruction, in his view, absolved initiative. Rachel understood that dynamic too. Doctrine enables displacement of guilt. That is why language matters. She revisited Meridian's archived materials again months later. Most public-facing documents were scrubbed, but cached versions remained in regulatory files. The phrase, permanent stabilization, was replaced with strategic continuity assurance. Different words, same potential elasticity. Rachel added note to ongoing advisory review, monitor euphemistic evolution. Because doctrine does not disappear, it rebrands. On the anniversary of Meera's death, Rachel visited the river again. No ceremony, no announcement, just observation. The building remained unchanged. Balconies illuminated at dusk, life ongoing. She imagined an alternate scenario. If intimidation had remained intimidation, if Arjun had nuffed earlier, if Vikram had not paused, if Meera had not dialed. Alternate paths rarely comfort. They clarify fragility. Rachel did not believe in fate. She believed in thresholds. Between 317 and 319, multiple thresholds were crossed. One person chose to escalate. Another chose not to intervene. A third chose to document through action. Those intersecting decisions created outcome. Rachel's phone vibrated again. Update from federal oversight. Manufacturing conglomerate executive resigned following audit findings. No injuries, no deaths. Preventative exposure successful. Rachel allowed herself a single exhale. Not relief, recognition. Sometimes justice arrives after harm. Sometimes it prevents it. Both matter. Back at headquarters, a junior detective approached her desk. He asked a question many investigators ask after their first major conspiracy case. How do you know when it's really over? Rachel considered the evidence board now cleared. The archived audio. The regulatory ripple effects. She answered simply. It doesn't repeat. He nodded. He would learn. Cases are not measured only by convictions. They are measured by recurrence. If doctrine adapts without violence, progress exists. If escalation declines, deterrence functions. Rachel archived the final supplemental report on Meridian Advisory, flagged for periodic review. Not because she expected immediate arrest, but because vigilance prevents normalization. That night, alone in her office, she replayed the emergency audio one final time before sealing the file permanently. She listened differently now, not for evidence. For structure, breathing, fear, decision, impact. It was not the loudest case she had worked. No public shootout, no spectacle. Just controlled violence intersecting with corporate ambition. But its consequences traveled further than most gunshots. 14 seconds had reshaped doctrine, and doctrine reshaped prevention. Rachel closed the file. Lights dimmed in the precinct. Outside, traffic hummed steadily. Control, once fractured, rarely restores fully. And those who attempt to enforce silence often underestimate the durability of record. Meera Sanyal's whisper remained archived, not as tragedy alone, but as precedent. Silence can be engineered. But interruption, however brief, can dismantle architecture, and as long as someone dials, there remains the possibility of exposure. 2 years later, the audio surfaced again. Not in court, not in training, but in a regulatory hearing broadcast quietly on a government channel few people watched voluntarily. The committee was examining proposed federal guidelines on corporate crisis response language. Specifically, prohibiting ambiguous escalation terminology in internal communications during active compliance disputes. It sounded bureaucratic. It was not. Rachel sat in her office with the hearing playing on a muted secondary screen. Closed captions scrolled across the bottom. One senator referenced a precedent case involving executive-directed stabilization that resulted in homicide. He did not say Meera's name, but he cited the timeline. 2 emergency calls. 14 seconds. Suppressed discharge. Language, no noise. Rachel turned the volume up. A regulatory analyst testified that coded phrasing creates interpretive elasticity inside corporate hierarchies. Elasticity allows subordinates to infer severity beyond explicit wording, and inference is where operational violence incubates. Rachel recognized the shift. The conversation had moved from crime to architecture, from individuals to systems. During the hearing, an industry lobbyist argued that language restrictions would criminalize managerial urgency. The analyst responded calmly, "Managerial urgency does not require euphemism." Rachel allowed a faint nod. Clarity prevents plausible deniability. Plausible deniability enables escalation. Meanwhile, in a federal correctional facility, Devraj Kapoor's appeal for sentence reconsideration was denied for the final time. He had exhausted procedural options. In a brief recorded statement submitted through counsel, he maintained he never instructed lethal force. He described himself as victim of misinterpretation. Rachel had heard that defense before. Misinterpretation implies unpredictability, but preparation contradicts unpredictability. Suppressor procurement is not misinterpretation. Burner phones are not misinterpretation. Guard distraction calls are not misinterpretation. They are anticipation. Across town, Arjun Mahatra had been transferred to a lower, security facility under cooperation terms. He had begun correspondence with a financial ethics foundation. Public atonement rarely balances private guilt, but it indicates cognitive shift. Vikram Dutt remained uncommunicative, but prison intelligence reports suggested he had refused multiple external consulting contacts seeking risk management advice. Even incarcerated, his skill set retained market value. Rachel requested monitoring of those contacts. Containment doctrine does not dissolve simply because one architect falls. It decentralizes. Back at headquarters, a data analyst approached Rachel with a compiled report. Since Devraj's conviction and the subsequent regulatory scrutiny, corporate whistleblower death classifications had statistically declined. Correlation does not equal causation. But pattern deviation matters. Rachel studied the chart, a downward slope where previously there had been irregular spikes. She did not celebrate. She documented. Documentation sustains vigilance. Later that week, she received a letter, handwritten, from Meera's mother. Short, grateful. It did not mention courtrooms. It mentioned the training seminar clip. Apparently, the family had been informed that the audio was used to educate investigators nationwide. The letter ended with a single sentence. She wanted truth to matter. Rachel folded the letter carefully, placed it inside the archived file. Truth had mattered, but truth had also required structure to survive. Rachel reflected on the word that defined the escalation. Enough. It had been spoken as termination, but in consequence, it became beginning. Because once that word was captured, the architecture collapsed. At a quarterly interagency meeting, Rachel presented findings on euphemistic escalation risk. She did not use emotional framing. She used timeline diagrams, decision nodes, behavioral inflection points. She emphasized that violence in structured environments often emerges when ambiguity shields accountability. A senior official asked her a question. If the victim had not called, would this have unraveled? Rachel answered without hesitation. No. Because absent interruption, narrative would have been constructed differently. Possibly staged intrusion. Possibly suicide framing. Possibly unresolved. 14 seconds created contradiction. Contradiction forces investigation. Investigation forces exposure. Exposure forces accountability. The chain begins small. That night, Rachel returned home later than usual. She stood by her window overlooking the city. Urban light patterns flickered across glass towers. Somewhere inside those towers, decisions were being made. Language was being drafted. Emails were being sent. She did not assume corruption in every room, but she understood the pressure calculus. Reputation versus regulation. Profit versus exposure. Control versus chaos. When fear of loss exceeds tolerance for transparency, escalation risk increases. That equation does not disappear. It must be monitored. Rachel opened her secure laptop one last time before sleep. She reviewed the manufacturing conglomerate case from months earlier. Internal memos now contained explicit compliance review language. No coded phrasing. No Permanent stabilization. No noise. Just procedural response. The shift was subtle, but measurable. Sometimes justice is not dramatic, it is linguistic. The next morning, the federal guidelines passed committee vote. Implementation would take time. Corporate lobbying would continue, but the precedent was now codified. Ambiguous crisis language during active compliance disputes could trigger automatic review. A guardrail, not a solution, but a barrier. Rachel printed the notice, added it to Meera's archived case file. Because ripple effects matter. Late afternoon, a young compliance officer from a separate corporation requested advisory meeting, not because she was threatened, because she recognized language drift. Prevention culture had begun forming. Rachel listened, advised documentation, escalation mapping, third-party counsel before confrontation, proactive containment a coercer rather than whistleblower. That inversion was critical. As the meeting ended, the officer asked quietly, "Do you think they'll ever stop trying to silence people?" Rachel responded evenly. "They'll try differently. Adaptation is constant, but exposure accelerates correction." That evening, as Rachel locked her office, she paused. The precinct hallway was quiet. She remembered the first moment she stood inside Meera's apartment. Sunlight across marble. Stillness, no visible struggle. Just silence. Silence had been the intended outcome. Instead, it became evidence. Cases like this do not fade completely. They recalibrate systems. They reshape incentives. They alter vocabulary. And vocabulary shapes action. Rachel walked out into the cooling night air, traffic steady. City indifferent. But beneath that indifference, something had shifted. 14 seconds had moved from emergency call log to courtroom evidence, to regulatory precedent, to preventive culture. Silence had not held, and in its place a record remained. Records outlast power, and power, once exposed, rarely regains its original form. 3 years after the night Meera Sanyal dialed twice, the audio was no longer evidence. It was policy reference. The federal compliance guidelines had been implemented for 12 months. Internal corporate communications during active disclosure disputes were now subject to mandatory preservation protocols. Certain phrases triggered automatic legal review. Stability above disruption. Permanent mitigation. No noise. Language once designed to obscure now generated scrutiny. Rachel stood before a small oversight committee reviewing annual impact metrics. There had been no whistleblower homicides linked to corporate escalation frameworks since implementation. Not zero suspicious deaths, but zero linked to structured containment language. The difference was narrow, but measurable. One committee member asked Rachel directly, "What prevented repetition?" She answered without dramatics, "Documentation." Because documentation disrupts ambiguity. Ambiguity fuels escalation. She did not speak about 14 seconds. She did not need to. The case file had already been cited in the footnotes of the policy draft. Later that afternoon, Rachel received confirmation that Meridian Advisory Group had dissolved formally. Its founder, Anil Verma, had retired fully from consulting following international review of risk language practices. No charges filed. Insufficient direct evidence. But market trust erosion had rendered the firm non-viable. Doctrine does not always collapse under prosecution. Sometimes it collapses under exposure. Inside a federal facility, Devraj Kapoor's name no longer appeared in business publications. His influence evaporated quietly. He had attempted one final appeal arguing prosecutorial overreach in interpretation of coded phrasing. It failed. The court opinion included a notable line: "Foreseeable violence concealed behind sanitized instruction remains foreseeable." That sentence circulated widely in compliance circles. Rachel printed a copy, added it to the archive binder, not as victory, as reminder. Across the city, a new generation of compliance officers attended orientation seminars. They were taught escalation matrices that included external transparency triggers. They were taught that intimidation is itself evidence. They were taught to document early. Rachel occasionally guessed, lectured without naming cases directly. She described threshold moments: loss of perceived control, rapid escalation following exposure attempts. She emphasized that violence often follows the realization that narrative control has fractured, and that intervention must occur before that fracture widens. After one session, a trainee approached her. Is it true someone once called twice before it happened? Rachel looked at him for a moment. Yes. Did it help? Yes. The trainee nodded. He did not ask more. He understood enough. That evening, Rachel drove once more past the riverfront building. New tenants occupied the 10th floor. Balcony plants visible. Lights warm. The marble floor had long been replaced. No trace of blood remained. Physical spaces reset. Records do not. Rachel parked briefly across the street. She did not get out. She did not revisit the hallway. She let the memory remain contextual. What defined the case was not the gunshot. It was the interruption. The first call had created possibility. The second had confirmed intent. The word, "nuff," had captured decision. And the suppressor, intended to eliminate noise, had amplified consequence. Rachel thought about the concept of control. Devraj believed control meant eliminating disruption. Vikram believed control meant executing instruction. Arjun believed control meant persuading outcome. Meera believed control meant exposing truth. Only one of those interpretations survived intact. Exposure, because exposure redistributes power. Silence centralizes it. As Rachel drove away, her phone vibrated with a routine notification. Another corporate disclosure submitted through proper regulatory channels. No resistance. No coercive language flagged. It was ordinary. And ordinary can be evidence of progress. Back at her office, she opened the sealed archive one final time. The physical file now thicker than the original homicide report. Inside transcripts, forensic diagrams, regulatory updates, policy citations. The handwritten letter. She added one last entry, 3-year review complete. No recurrence linked to structured containment escalation. Continue monitoring linguistic shifts. She closed the binder, locked it, not because the case was forgotten, but because it had transitioned from active investigation to structural precedent. Before turning off her desk lamp, she allowed herself one last playback. Not of the full audio, just the first few seconds. Breathing. Urgent. Alive. She stopped it before the shot, because what mattered most was not the ending. It was the attempt. 14 seconds had altered trajectory, and as long as someone somewhere chooses to dial, there remains the possibility that silence will fracture again. Rachel switched off the light. The precinct hallway dimmed. Outside, the city moved forward, unaware of the architectural shift embedded quietly beneath its glass towers. Justice had not erased loss. It had altered calculus. And sometimes altering calculus is the most durable form of prevention.